Welcome to this Autism Ontario webinar. My name is Matthew Lay, and as always, I will be your host. In celebration of International Women's Day, we'll be discussing how parents can help build self-advocacy skills with their daughters and make informed decisions. We're also going to have an opportunity to hear some stories of success and challenges and advice from two autistic women. But our guest today will be Stephanie Moeser. She's been with us before, but this is, I think, definitely the first time this year. Before we get into the good stuff, I've got some points that I need to discuss. First off, opinions reflected in this webinar session are those of the speakers, myself, the presenters, and do not reflect Autism Ontario. Please note, Autism Ontario does not endorse any specific therapy, product, treatment, strategy, opinion, service, or individual. We do, however, endorse your right to information. Autism Ontario strongly believes it is important to do your own research and make your own informed decisions, which is one of the big reasons why we host these webinars. With the aim of being inclusive and respectful and representative of the many voices within our diverse community, we will use both identity first and person first referential language. We acknowledge the use of language is evolving rapidly and will continue to be an ongoing discussion within the autism community. For more information about Autism Ontario's language statement can be found in our resource section. All of that out of the way, I am happy to welcome Stephanie. Stephanie, thanks so much for coming to the webinar today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's been many years since I've been in person here.
I know you. I've worked with you remotely. I've worked with you in person previously, but our audience doesn't. So talk a little bit about your background and what brings you here with us today.
Sure. So I was reflecting today that I've been working, I guess, in the autism field many years, since 1999. Began working mostly with parents of more newly diagnosed kids, and sort of my roles have evolved over time, and then was working with adults. So currently, 2025, I have a private practice, relatively small, which is almost entirely neurodivergent folks. So folks with ADHD and or autism. And my full-time job is I'm a therapist at Trent University. And in that capacity, I see all students, but also Trent has a number of students, as many universities do, who are neurodivergent. So I see people in that capacity there.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as I mentioned off the top, we do have some stories from two very interesting young women, Lauren Portengen and Patricia Baxter. And so we're going to introduce those to you now with a little pre-recorded video. You can go ahead and roll that now.
My name's Lauren Portengen. I live in Waterloo Region. I am an autistic woman. My pronouns are she, her. I was diagnosed when I was about, I think, the date doesn't really stick in my brain, but yeah, I've done a lot of work professionally within the mental health field. I work within child and youth mental health. Focusing on supporting families and early intervention, preventative kind of supports for whole mental health supports within a family system. I think I've come across many situations where people don't feel like they have voice and choice. And so to me, advocacy is really important, both as an individual to advocate for my own needs, but also advocacy within the system to help bring about change and educate people.
My name is Patricia Baxter. I was diagnosed at the time with Asperger's syndrome, but now I generally identify as autistic. At the age of 12 years old, that diagnosis really helped me understand a lot more about who I am, how my brain works, and how I can connect with people both on the spectrum and neurotypical people who are not on the spectrum. I typically independent writer, so that means I tend to write various articles and reviews for independent websites like the Anime News Network and I Need Diverse Games. Self-advocacy is important because for me, a major part of my disability is understanding people. Specifically, it relates to nonverbal social cues. It's those types of things are more difficult for me to discern than the average person. Having the ability to sort of speak up and communicate like what my needs are essential for my day-to-day life. Self-advocacy is just like a tool that's important not just for autistic people, but for people in general.
All right. So now that we've met everyone, the audience should be seeing the learning objectives on the screen. Let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover here, and also why is this such an important topic today?
So you can see the learning objectives around self-advocacy and why it's important. Some considerations on teaching skills. I'm going to talk a little bit about context. So context essentially means different situations, different locations.
Right.
So how we may advocate with our partners or our parents may be very different than how we do with a professor.
Right.
So knowing context is important, and that's going to be important when teaching these skills.
Right.
And we're going to talk a little bit about the supportive development of advocacy skills. All of these, I think you can kind of bundle up and think about the importance in terms of quality of life.
Okay.
You know, I think when we know as individuals what we want and need, when we're able to live a life alongside those things, like a meaningful life, it enhances quality of life. You know, things like healthcare, making sure we get the correct healthcare, making sure that we're, you know, if somebody's volunteering or looking for employment, that we're advocating for things that are enhancing. And we'll talk about later. Advocacy really is just day to day, what I want to wear, what I want to eat, those sorts of things that can be built quite early on in an individual's life.
Okay, so big part of today is getting answers to questions.
Yes.
But this is one that I personally had queued up, so it's not on the list. Sorry, guys, but it's the right time. How early do you suggest starting to talk about advocacy with your children?
And I think
Self-advocacy.
Self-advocacy. I mean, I think advocacy is in general is about talking about what things need to change. Right. And again, we'll talk about this later, but we are talking about girls and women specifically here. But all of the skills that we're going to talk about are for anyone, really.
Right.
I mean, there may be some specific to girls and women, but most of these skills can be generalized to, you know, cisgendered folks, non-binary folks on the spectrum, and neurotypical folks. And so in terms of age, one, we have to know your kids' sort of developmental age a little bit and what they're able to understand. But I really think it can be starting quite early in terms of offering choices.
Right.
You know, even when you're dressing your little one, when they're able to kind of reach out and pick something.
Yeah.
Foods, offering 2 different types of cereal. So, you know, I think we tend to think of advocacy in this sort of big picture, but really those choices on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Help to build autonomy, which we really want. And so I think, you know, to answer your question, quite early. I don't think we don't need a diagnosis.
Yeah.
It's about offering choices and helping our children know what their preferences are.
Yeah, it's important that point. It's not always the big things, right? When we hear self-advocacy, especially when we're talking, it's often about you've got an IEP, you need to advocate in the school for all this change. But advocacy can be those little things. So let's start off and let's define what is self-advocacy.
I mean, essentially, it's just the ability, not just because it is a difficult thing sometimes, right. The ability to know what you want and need, and then the means to communicate in whatever way that may be. It could be sign, it could be spoken language, it could be augmentative communication. You know, parents often know their children in terms of just vocalizations and how they react, but the ability to communicate these wants and needs. I think to know what you want is harder than it sounds, especially for folks who may have been trying really hard to fit in with peers, folks who, may have trouble making choices because we'll talk about some rejection sensitivity later, but knowing what you really want sometimes is difficult. And so offering those choices early on, giving some autonomy. We've talked about boundaries too, as parents. You have to say no sometimes to things, but, to help, our kids, your kids, know what they want and need is going to be a really important piece. And then, as I said, communication.
Okay. So the skills that everybody should be looking at here, the necessary skills, what are those?
So, as I talked about, knowing one's wants and needs, and that I think is important to see this also not as a one-time destination, but a journey. I know for myself, my wants and needs have changed over time. As I become more confident in myself, I can express, things that maybe other people may not agree with. I think we'll be talking about anxiety later as well, of coping with, maybe being disappointing other people. But knowing and learning one wants and needs is an important skill, which we'll be talking about. Knowing what supports may help. So part of this is helping your child, teenage child, adult child, do research on what supports may be available in different contexts. Sometimes people don't even know what's available to help them. And then finding ways to communicate those needs to other people.
So when it comes to these critical skills, or necessary skills as we're calling them,
Yeah.
are there any that you have found that are harder for young girls to learn than boys? And if so, why is that?
I think when you think about one's needs and wants, we know there's no slide here about masking, but I'll probably refer to that a few times. We know the research is showing that many autistic folks do mask. Essentially what that means is wanting to fit in, wanting to appear as neurotypical as possible, because that's often reinforced in society. Yeah. And so people have spent many years often trying to do that. And so in my experience, some of those, and girls are often socialized. Right. Things are shifting to be sort of more agreeable. And so I think that is can be more difficult for girls and women. Right. That kind of being true to yourself and knowing what it is that you really want, and being able to communicate that in the face of other people who may disagree.
Right.
Yeah.
Getting a bunch of these questions, and we're going to try to answer them throughout and layer it in, but I wanted to just ask about the skill focus if a child is nonverbal or limited in their verbal communication skills. Are the things that you focus on in those situations?
It's not my area of expertise in terms of the sort of people who have more challenges, not challenges, but communicate differently. But I think giving options, giving, different tangible ways to communicate, as I said earlier on with the picking clothes.
Right.
So, there's ways you can help people advocate, and sometimes it's showing different choices, helping people point to things. We don't want to offer too many choices, as we know that can be overwhelming. Yeah. So, and then through the decisions that people are making from picking different things, picking foods, you can begin to discern what some of the preferences are. Even when somebody's out, going to a park versus going to an indoor play place, right. Observing how somebody seems to be in terms of their comfort level. We know some people are excellent at augmentative communication, using note apps, things like that, to be able to communicate if they have some ability to write and type. So using what tools may be available. I also think, as I said at the beginning, as parents, different vocalizations, different, when somebody's happy, sometimes they may stim in a certain way. When somebody's overwhelmed, they may shut down and stim. So kind of picking up on those ways and offering, as I said, tangible, concrete things to show somebody to make some choices.
Right. And I didn't understand at first when you're saying giving choice. Like, I didn't understand how that was teaching advocacy, but it's letting down and the individual decide what it is that they are interested in. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the difference between independence and interdependence.
Yeah, this is maybe my my own perspective and my own
Oh, that's why you're here.
yeah, my own soapbox, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we do a disservice when we focus so much in independence.
Okay.
Because who truly of us is, independent every day? I mean, I think of myself. I'll out myself here that I'm not excellent at paying bills. And so my husband is very good at making things sure are keeping track of when things need to be paid. And so he is given that task. Or he's taken on that task. So that's the interdependence around, how we support one another just as human beings. If I've had a busy day at work, and I'm just feeling like I can't do something, the interdependence of the family. And so I do think, advocacy is about, yes, enhancing independence, but I think we tend to think of helping and support, sometimes through a negative lens. And I think we can also see that as being shared, as being community driven as well, so that we can enhance the interdependence people have on people as well.
Right. Okay, so we have a question from a parent who is focused mainly on the end here, which is the communicating.
Communicating, yeah.
Right. So the child is good at communicating when they know the adult.
Yes.
So advocacy comes naturally, or they've learned the skill of choice and everything that goes along with it. But when they don't know the adult, they seem to struggle with self-advocacy. Do you have any recommendations for this parent or any strategies you've employed there?
Well, first of all, I think it's actually developmentally appropriate sometimes to have some
I'd say.
wariness around people we don't know,
Yeah.
especially at that age. So I think that's just important to recognize that that's developmentally, not unusual, and shows sort of that being aware that strangers are different. I think how old was the child? 6? I think it said 6.
Yeah.
I think that's when we can have some fun at home and act things out, role play. And this is, I think, what interdependence comes into. So we're going to talk about scaffolding skills later on, but essentially scaffolding skills means offering higher supports when somebody is learning a new skill, offering more support, and then slowly fading out that when somebody's becoming more independent, more confident. And so, at 6 years old, meeting a new person and wanting to advocate for something, saying you're going to a friend's house and the parents there, they may want play with certain toy there. Simply being there with your child, as I'm sure you are, being there with your child, standing with them, offering that sort of moral support, helping them, giving them the words sometimes, and introducing the topic, essentially scaffolding, introducing the topic, but then also encouraging the child to, taking those pauses. We know neurodivergent folks sometimes process information differently and sometimes have delays in their speech. So it's okay to pause for a little while.
Yeah.
Give them that space.
Right.
To give it a try. And if they're not able to, kind of step in and give the words. And I think role playing at home, acting things out. To help the person feel more confident in those situations. Right.
And this is definitely something that gets better with that confidence, right? So you do something, you have success, and then
for sure,
it's easier to do it.
For sure.
To do it again.
And I'll back up there again too. I think, depending on the situation, if these, if you can find other adults who are friends of yours, you can also set up a little bit of that ahead of time. Especially for somebody that young. So you're setting up the dynamic with these friends already.
Yeah.
So they're kind of they're part of the plan.
Right.
So that they can also help prompt, did you have something to ask me?
Yeah.
So that you can kind of set that up as somebody's learning.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on to the benefits of self-advocacy. We're all here to learn how to advocate. So clearly we see some inherent value. But the words that I like is the top one, is that the idea about how it enhances one's quality of life. Walk us through them all, but talk about what you mean when you say quality of life.
So in my work a lot lately, I've been talking, I find myself talking about values, which is point 3 there. So talking about one's values, and values doesn't necessarily mean morals or ethics, though for some people it could, but I think it's around living a life that is meaningful.
Right.
That involves preferences, that is important in terms of, friendships are meaningful or what have you. So when one is able to make choices and advocate for things that are that are important in terms of their meaning, making a meaningful life, the side benefit is that it does enhance quality of life. And quality of life means being able to participate in aspects of life that are of your preference, of your, essentially of your choosing. And that aligns with what gives you meaning.
Okay.
And we know, through research, that quality of life increases happiness, can increase confidence. It can also help you not overcome, but live alongside moments of anxiety.
Yeah.
So when you know you're doing something, you're making a choice that's maybe difficult, but you're doing it because it's aligns with your values. That's important. I often talk about when I work with students and clients. Believe it or not, I am an anxious presenter. I do it a lot, and I sometimes used to dread doing it. But because educating other people aligns with my values and meanings, and a meaningful life, it has helped me, acknowledge my anxiety.
Yeah.
Which is about advocacy too. Acknowledge my anxiety, but still recognize it's important I make steps towards that meaningful life. And that can help when people are feeling overwhelmed, knowing this is something that's important to me.
Yeah. And I sat on this desk not 2 months ago, it was Katie Albert, but you'll find out what it is. Someone will send a link out. We're talking about things that parents can do who are overwhelmed. And it was the exact same conversation.
Yeah.
It's about that idea about tying it to your values. And then that will increase happiness or quality of life. It's a very powerful way of looking at things. And I think a fundamental change, because when I look at the other benefits here, they're all around that idea of, more success at school, being able to, make and keep and hold friends. But it really starts off with that top part.
And I think sort of when you think about sort of values and quality of life, sometimes we're so goal oriented, as we should be. It's helpful. Goals give clear direction, and so I think goals are important, obviously. But values, it doesn't set up a pass or fail, good or bad, right or wrong. It gives guideposts, right? It gives guideposts, and I think advocacy, you can think of that as guideposts towards that meaningful life.
Right.
Yeah.
Any of the other points that we haven't talked about yet?
Provides better access to supports. I think we'll talk, and healthcare kind of, go hand in hand. I work in the post-secondary environment in my main job. And so when you know what supports are available to you and you have some confidence to access them, it is possible that you are going to be better set up for success.
Right.
Healthcare. We know, access to healthcare is so important. But if you are not feeling comfortable or able to know, what you want to talk about in terms of healthcare, what's the supports you need, that can have detrimental effects.
Right.
And so feeling confident in that, support, all of this supports self-confidence.
Right. I got a bunch of questions, your questions queued up, but before I get to them, I think it's important that we talk about what does self-advocacy look like in action?
I mean, we've touched upon many of these things,
right?
And I wanted to do this slide just to recognize, that it can be day-to-day things.
Okay.
That we can build up to when we have self-confidence around asking for these things. What I want for breakfast, do I want what cereal I want, what clothes I want to wear, what support I need to shower and get ready. We know some folks need a little bit more support around, what tasks have to happen in the shower. What I think is important here, which I didn't really mention on any of the slides, but I think I could talk about it here, is, I mean, I'm a parent as well. And if my kid asked me for candy for breakfast, I would generally say no, except on special, Easter, whatever,
Yeah.
those days. Self-advocacy and asking for choices does not mean that as a parent, you have to agree to everything.
Right.
In fact, we're talking about rejection sensitivity. I think it's a good place sometimes to experiment with being able to say, actually, I know that's something you want. In my role as a parent, it's to keep you healthy and safe. I know you want to wear shorts and it's -20 out.
Yes.
Maybe we consider it 0, is recognizing, although day to day, people are advocating for what they want and need. Sometimes, there's going to be no's to those things.
Right.
I even think of the post-secondary environment. Self-advocacy in action is, say, for example, somebody's really overwhelmed with the smells of people eating in a seminar classroom.
Yeah.
They have very big sensory issues, and they want to ask the prof to ask people not to eat. Then you may have somebody else in the classroom who has a requirement to eat for what it may have a medical condition. And sometimes those things can't be met. Sometimes it's about finding balance, and a rejection to some asks. And I think that's important to work in when children are young as well, that not just because you're asking for something to be a certain way or you have this want and need.
Right.
May not always be able to be accommodated for lots of different reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we started this, I really honestly, shows what I know, but I really honestly believe that we were going to be talking about all communication skills, like how to ask and when to do it and things like that. But it sounds like there's a lot more when it comes to rounding out the skill set required for self-advocacy. So talk to us about that.
You mean the different skills, the anxiety management?
I thought it was going to primarily be communication.
Yeah, I mean, communication obviously is the more concrete one, the one that you can see,
right?
Or they're here or look at or what have you. I know in my work, and as parents and autistic folks who may be watching, professionals, we know that autistic folks live disproportionately with a higher level of anxiety.
Okay.
And we also know when things are not predictable or you cannot see the outcome, that can be really anxiety provoking, the kind of unknown. And when you are asking for something, of course you want that need to be met.
Right.
But often there's the unknown, right? And so it's a very anxiety-provoking situation. We talked about with a 6-year-old not knowing somebody. I think about some of the students that I work with who have to or should be asking, maybe asking for an extension. And the anxiety sometimes that gets in the way can be pretty significant. And so I think alongside knowing what one wants and needs is having skills to recognize anxiety. Mm-hmm. Having skills to manage it. So anxiety management skills, obviously it can be a whole other topic.
Oh,
I believe if I'm correct, Autism Ontario just recently had a something about that. And so I'm sure there's stuff on your website, but finding ways to teach anxiety management skills so that people, we talked about alongside values, have these skills to calm, to ground. And I'm a big proponent that it's not about getting rid of anxiety, because I don't think that's possible. But it's about how to recognize it and be able to cope with those sensations, those thoughts that show up, and it goes back to values, and still be able to take a step towards what's important, to ask those questions. Conflict resolution skills. Is there going to be sometimes, I talked about an example, in a classroom where, somebody, the sensory issues are significant, and maybe somebody in the classroom needs to have food.
Right.
There's conflict all the time, which conflicts come, conflict has a negative connotation to it. It just means disagreement, right? And I think teaching those skills of how we can advocate, say, this is what I need. What do you need? How can we come together? Obviously, it's much more nuanced and difficult than that. So sometimes having parents coach through that, having teachers coach through that can be important in supporting self-advocacy. Rejection sensitivity. So there is this phrase or this concept, I guess you could say, rejection sensitive dysphoria, RSD.
Okay.
It's not a diagnosis.
Okay.
It's kind of maybe a framework you can think of, or something that's more common. So it's actually more common for folks with ADHD, but also autistic people. And I like labels sometimes because, I often refer to, in my work, the movie Inside Out. Because I like that movie because we can conceptualize different emotion.
Right.
And you can see. And so when rejection sensitivity shows up, I like to say to people, let's just label that. That we can create a little character in our mind or a thought. There's rejection sensitivity that comes up. So that label is helpful. So we know neurodivergent folks are more sensitive to rejection. Not even, so often, one of the challenging features is it's not always actual rejection.
Right.
It's perceived rejection.
Right.
Or the fear of rejection. It's neutral. So for people who have rejection sensitive dysphoria or could have features of it, even neutral responses show up as being rejection. And so you even understand, when you're thinking about this, how that could impact advocacy. If you are, and let me be clear. Unfortunately, we know also neurodivergent folks have real experiences of rejection.
Who's that too? More
than neurotypical folks. So it does come from a place of sometimes real past experiences of being rejected. So it's sort of heightened awareness. And so it's teaching skills to cope with that and recognizing, again, it shows up a little bit of as anxiety, labeling it and be like, oh, I see what's happening here. She's a little rejection sensitivity monster showing up, and recognizing that thoughts are not always facts, and teaching young people and teens how to still take a step towards while risking rejection, because rejection could show up.
Yeah. So
it's all those nuanced pieces.
Yeah. And skills that all kids struggle with. Rejection is something that all kids struggle with.
Yeah.
It is. Got some questions here now that we've gotten through that part. My daughter is good at advocating for herself and others, but oftentimes can become too involved in others' issues, causing tension and issues with her teachers and peers. I admire her sticking up for those she believes need a voice, but how can I teach her the line and how to draw it?
Yeah, it's nuanced too, right?
Yeah.
I think, as you said, what amazing activist budding, I guess. So, to have those awareness of other people's maybe sense of injustice. We know sometimes I work with many folks who have a very strong sense of social justice and injustice to other people, which again, you don't want to dampen that too much. I like to think of it also as teaching, just as I'm sure your as a daughter, has a strong sense of wants to be autonomous. Right. Teaching that too, that other people want that sense to be autonomous as well. And, and that we also can't speak for other people. Somebody may not be yet in a position to want to, you think of sorry, I'm pointing at the screen. But you think of people who may not yet have the anxiety management skills, right, to address some of those feelings. So maybe even talking to her about that, although this is wonderful, it actually may make other people feel uncomfortable. They may not be there yet. Yeah. Checking in, so you have consent. Does this person want you to be involved? So teaching that, again, this is kind of, when I talk about contextual thinking. In different contexts, it's okay to, how you advocate. And so a context for another person, you kind of have to have their permission, really. You should have their permission. And they may not be in a place where they want to do that yet. And that's okay. I also think it's important to recognize that everybody has their own level of comfort. And we can't, even though we think somebody should be able to advocate for themselves more, people have the right to not be there yet. People have the right also to make mistakes. People have, part of independence is giving people rights to do things at their own pace.
Right.
And so maybe having some of those conversations with your daughter around that context, at the same time highlighting, as it sounds like this person does, what an amazing thing it is to be aware of other people and aware of that empathy that shows up.
And comfort coming forward in the
Exactly.
Got a question here about you brought it up briefly. I think it's involved within the rejection sensitivity, but it's around helping children with sensitivity to criticism.
Mm-hmm.
So the child struggles with criticisms from her peers about her clothing or the food that she takes for lunch and school. She will not rewear anything to school or take food she enjoys eating at home if she's been criticized previously. Suggestions for this child or this parent on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this stuff obviously happens to neurotypical people's kids as well. School can be challenging. I'm sure as this parent is doing anyway, is validating those feelings, right? I think when a person is heard, and understood and validated, it opens to some spaciousness to have a more difficult conversation. So be like, of course that sucks. I'm sure that feels really bad to be criticized. I also think we'll talk about a little bit about role modeling. I think it's, even maybe talking about some of your own experiences of being criticized and how you dealt with that, or feeling as though other people were critical of you and how you dealt with that. So I think when you can kind of generalize, it kind of makes it a more of a universal experience rather than just on her daughter. And it is about, learning how to cope with some of these, anxieties that show up,
right?
And she may not be ready yet to address this, but giving her the tools, like, okay, some affirmations, sometimes even like, it's okay. Some simple statements. It's okay that I'm wearing the same clothes twice.
Yeah. Also
showing that most people do.
Yeah.
It's okay that my food choices are different. So giving her some language around that. And also some language to, if she was feeling up to it, I don't know how old this person is, how she can also advocate for herself at school. Some language around if somebody brings something up,
right?
How to respond. And also recognize just because it happened before doesn't mean it's going to happen again. When we talk about being aware of rejections, there's this hypersensitivity, right, to or hypervigilance, which essentially means that you're always on the lookout.
Yeah,
expecting it. And, so depending on how old this person is, sometimes even giving some psychoeducation, which essentially means educating kids on some of these, how your brain works, how your brain's trying to protect you.
Yeah.
And how we can recognize that just because that hypervigilance shows up, that hyper-awareness, doesn't mean those things are going to happen again.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So at home, whether it be, teaching them the communication side or anxiety management, how do we teach self-advocacy as parents and caregivers?
So I think we, touched upon this as we were having these conversations. So role modeling, I think, is really, a key for many skills. So, showing when you were advocating for yourself, but also talking out loud sometimes, talking about that out loud. Look what I did. I had a hard day at work and I was able to talk to my supervisor about that. And, something in my office, which I've had to advocate for my office of, when it's not warm enough, I've had to go and ask for something that may be uncomfortable. So I think role modeling is talking to your kids about ways that you do it as well.
Right.
And challenges about that and anxieties that may show up. So I think when we can normalize it, it can seem more, easy to approach.
Okay.
We talked about scaffolding already. Essentially what that means is offering more supports at the beginning. And when somebody needs those, if they don't need the more supports at the beginning, don't don't provide it. But if somebody needs more supports in the beginning, provide that and fade back. So simple things like, which seems simple. If you are at a restaurant,
Right.
and your child's having a hard time picking something to eat or having a hard time ordering for themselves, scaffolding a skill could be giving. First of all, I knew theirs is ordering for them. Second time, giving them the words. Third time, kind of standing back and watching. So all, when you think about ordering food, that's also advocacy and a really good place to start. Practicing in safe environments. I talked about before having adult friends maybe who can help practice this with safe people that you trust, obviously. Accepting, sometimes accepting that your child may not be there yet. Your child may need some more of these anxiety management skills first. Sometimes may need more conflict resolution skills. So kind of accepting where somebody's at in terms of their process. We don't want to get, ahead of where somebody's at, because sometimes what happens there is you can, fancy words like, flood somebody with anxiety. Yes. So we don't want to do that, because that's when somebody shuts down. Mm-hmm. And we want to be able to kind of work up. Having boundaries, I talked a little bit about as parents. This means two things. Sort of as parents, it's okay to have boundaries to say, no, you can't stay up till midnight today and watch whatever. However, maybe on the weekend we can consider it. Having boundaries around, what food somebody can eat, that you have to brush your teeth. A child can advocate for I shouldn't have to brush my teeth. No, I mean, we're responsible for our health and welfare of kids. So it's okay. And part of that could be supporting working through conflict. I get that, I get that brushing your teeth is uncomfortable. What can we do to minimize that? Different brushes we can get, different toothpaste we can get. So working with your child to come up with other solutions through things that could be difficult.
Yeah. And on the modeling side, when I had the opportunity to interview Lauren and Patricia, I heard stories of, how advocacy happened with the parents first at school and the like. And then later I guess it had been modeled for them. And then later it helped them in their self-advocacy as they got older. Those full interviews will be available to you to view after this webinar. But as we get into these different situations, we are going to play some specific stories of success and examples. So maybe you can start with healthcare and education from the idea of self-advocacy in those scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, again, I just want to really highlight, we're talking at a high level here because of the time. Each of these could take a whole an hour. So, but healthcare especially, I was reminded recently, it was an interesting story, and have permission to share it with somebody I'm working with who happens to be an 18-year-old young woman. And she, masks sometimes, as many autistic people don't. And she has learned, when somebody asks how you doing, they're like, oh, fine, thanks, how are you? Good. Even when, life is falling to pieces or what have you. Oh, I'm fine, thanks. And so when she went to see a doctor recently about some physical health concerns, the doctor asked, how are you doing? She's like, oh, fine. And, and thankfully, she had support from her mother. Was like, hold on. This is a different context.
Right.
In this situation, when somebody asks you how you're doing, you need to be very honest and say things and tell a healthcare provider things that may not, you may not tell other people. Right. As you're teaching that context around advocating, we also know, women. I also want to really point out that women, but especially women of color who have disabilities, there's a lot of research to support that their needs aren't heard as well or are dismissed within the healthcare settings. And so being able, sometimes it's like having to really go against something that makes you anxious. People who seemingly have a level of authority and be like, hold on, you're not hearing me.
Yeah.
And really, you're not hearing me. Asking for a second opinion. I think within the resources, there's a really good resource package from Surrey Place Centre in Toronto, around some healthcare forms and things that you can fill out and help bring to different appointments. So you're already tooled with some really good advocacy pieces.
Preparing for a healthcare visit is the resource, and it is in the overall resource package.
It is excellent. Education, of course, we can talk about education, elementary school, post-secondary. My experience is mostly in the post-secondary education. But being able to ask for, sometimes being able to ask for extensions. All students ask for extensions. But being able to, in whatever comfort level you have, sometimes choosing what you're disclosing to a teacher. One does not need to disclose to anybody their disability to get accommodations, just so you know. But just what their functional need is. And so actually knowing some of those pieces, you don't have to tell anybody your diagnosis. You just need a doctor or healthcare provider to say, these are the accommodations that are needed. Right. And so arming yourself with some of that information can be really helpful. Some of that's research. And that all those things can help you, a lot of students I work with take a reduced course load.
Right.
And that's advocacy too, to be like, I need a little bit less so that because school may be a bit more stressful for me, or because I have other demands that I'm working through, or the processing of information. So arming yourself with what your rights are is part of advocacy too. And part of that is parents can help with supporting through looking at resources. The other thing is I talked about ordering food and things. I know that seems small, but there's a number of people who get to volunteer placements, employment, education, who have had their parents fantastic support, and then they're like, shoot, I have to make this phone call myself.
Right.
I have to walk up to this desk myself and say, I need an appointment. And so giving more of that independence earlier on helps build confidence to do those things.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, now we're going to hear from Lauren Portengen with an example of having to advocate within her own family. So if we can go ahead and roll that video.
I'm going to use an example about advocating within my family system. I think that can be a space that feels really scary for people. And we often think about advocating with professionals and doctors or at schools. And I think sometimes we lose the nuances of advocating within your own family. And so I'm very thankful that my partner was supportive and on board and helpful in doing all of his own learning while I was going through getting a diagnosis. And so got the diagnosis, did more learning about it, all of that stuff. And we needed to go home to his family, so my in-laws, for the holidays. And that felt really scary for me because I love them to bits. They're lovely people. And yet it's a different relationship than with my own parents. And so it felt nerve-wracking to share with them that I'm autistic. And it wasn't like I was suddenly different overnight because a doctor had said, you're autistic. It's not like some wand got waved over me kind of thing. And yet I felt different. I had done all of this learning, and I felt like because I had done this learning, I had a deeper understanding of myself. I was more confident in taking up space, and that I was nervous that I would appear more autistic and they might have questions. I also was recognizing that I was quickly running out of capacity. I was deep in the midst of burnout. And so there were spaces where I would have previously worn a mask, not necessarily by choice, but I would have previously worn a mask. There might be situations where I'm not wearing a mask anymore because I can't. And the lack of choice in when I want to wear a mask or not is a bit of a trigger for me. And so it feels scary to not wear a mask or not have the choice to wear a mask. And so I was nervous about what situations I might run into where I might seem different because I wasn't able to wear that mask. And so I remember having lots of conversations, tearful ones with my partner about what this could look like. I felt very ashamed almost that I didn't trust their family more or trust that They would love me the same and nothing would be different. And so I had to process a lot of like almost like gaslighting myself a little bit. And so we had a lot of conversations about how they could support me, what it could look like there. I wanted to have almost like a bit of a safety plan that if I wasn't feeling okay, if things were just too much, where I could go, what I could do. And so he was very helpful in helping me pack, I remember, and helping me like come up with a plan. Like, do you have your earphones? Do you have your knitting? I really like to knit and crochet. Here's the plan. He agreed to like buffer things from me or buffer things around me a little bit. And so if he noticed that maybe I didn't appear okay, he's very good at knowing my tells, that he would kind of gently scoot me off to the side and check in and see if I was okay or if I was just quickly going down the shutdown train. And then when we got there, it was great. It was fine. And I'm not going to say that like I felt like we were over prepared, but I think we had conversations with his family. We let them know that I might need to step away and it's okay. And if I'm not as bubbly and outgoing as I normally am, that like this is burnout. This is what burnout looks like. And his mom made me a lovely little like nest that I could go retreat to in a room if I needed to have some quiet space. And so that I found preparing them for what they might expect helped me feel confident that there wouldn't be unknowns in situations necessarily. And so I found his support in kind of coming up with a plan and carrying some of that, communicating with others what the plan might be, was really helpful. And having him help me in sharing how I'm feeling, which can feel really vulnerable when you're stuck in this should kind of space, helping him share that like, we're not feeling that great and it's fine. There's nothing you can do. It's just, be mindful that maybe she's a bit quiet or, those kinds of things. And so, yeah, that was really helpful.
What I love about that video is what echoes something you said about the family and the power of knowledge, right? They learned, and so they were able to help. Talk to me a little bit about the situation of leisure and recreation.
Yeah, I think this is sometimes not talked about enough. It's kind of an undervalued, unfortunately, area of people's lives. But it's what gives, self-care and well-being, especially, Lauren talked about burnout. Sometimes having access to leisure and recreation is very important. And I think that's where, again, choice and advocating for when you have lower capacity, what that leisure and recreation looks like. When you have higher capacity, what that looks like. Yeah. And making sure that people have access to things and other people. I often think with recreation and leisure, there's some social components to that as well, often. So advocating, how often, and sometimes parents feel, I'm generalizing here, but feel like people need to be busy all the time.
Yeah. And,
for some folks saying like, I actually need my little, as Laura mentioned, little nest in my room to decompress. So advocating, teaching people how to advocate for duration and type of recreation, I think is important.
Okay. And the last one that we have is advocating in the workplace. And for that, we will go to Patricia Baxter.
As an example, when I begin like the job hunting process, I'd like to disclose in my cover letter where it's pertinent that I'm an individual and on the autistic spectrum, so that potential employers will know, okay, this is a person with a disability, and so they probably have some form of accommodation that they require in the workforce. And when it gets to the interview stage, I will typically ask, is it possible for me to have a written copy of those questions? Because to me, I'm a very visual person, not really an auditory-based learner. So, like, if I have the questions in front of me, I can see them, and I can answer the question fully and to the best of my ability. Whereas if the question was spoken to me, chances are I would forget quite a bit of the question as soon as I heard of it. Like, I probably remember the first half of the question and can answer that, but I may have forgotten the second half. If I'm hired, then I will usually sit with my supervisor, like schedule a time to sit with my supervisor and explain, these are my accommodations, and this is what I need to succeed. Like, usually, once again, emphasize the need of written instructions, and on my end, I tend to be proactive and ask for clarification if I'm about a task to make sure that it's all being completed correctly and accurately. If the workplace allows it, then in the past I've also done presentations about what it's like to be an autistic person in the workplace, so that, more to sort of like explain my experiences and hopefully help people understand the experiences of autistic people, but also like accommodations for potential autistic clients that they have. My supervisors have been very attentive and very, very good at like checking in with me. Like, it's not just me going forward and meeting people halfway. They also meet me halfway, and it's like really awesome to actually have someone willing to meet you halfway, because sadly that's not always the case. So they've met me halfway, talked about things in advance, let me know if there's any changes in my routine, or they have a new task for me, they let me know in advance rather than dropping it last minute. Like I said before, always having some sort of written confirmation, or sort of like I've been given printouts of like detailing my tasks at hand, as it were. So that's been really helpful. For people starting out, it might be good to just sort of do a moment of self-reflection, or like talk with someone you know and trust, and sort of think, I've noticed I've been getting really anxious in this scenario. Maybe reflect on what you're feeling and maybe think about some potential strategies based on those feelings. Because for me, I know when I was really young, I was not very good at identifying my thoughts and feelings as well as I do as an adult. I feel like in retrospect, if I had those skills and knew that those would be helpful, then it would have helped my younger self a lot better. And it's like, I don't know, taking a moment to stop and self-reflect is good at any age, really.
Another very powerful story with, going as far as giving a presentation in her workplace. Clearly, a lot of experience advocating. So we're at usually when we end. So we're going to go a little bit longer than normal. I know we haven't gotten to all of your questions, but we've got a mechanism that we're going to work on afterwards and go through a lot of those questions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go another few minutes, get through the last couple slides, potentially a question or two. If you need to leave, please complete the survey located on the left-hand side before you go. Make sure you grab those resources. And note, this will all be available on demand tomorrow on the Autism Ontario website. So Stephanie, let's talk about supporting advocacy and what that looks like.
So I think recognizing, from a parent's perspective, recognizing what our own values are, and helping our children recognize what their values are. And I keep coming back to this because I think it's so important in terms of advocacy and guiding the trail for that. So when we can begin to talk about what gives your life meaning, that's how we can support advocacy. And it doesn't have to be like a formal conversation, but like when your kid wants to go outside and try out for a baseball team,
Right?
You can just label that. It's like, oh, it seems like you really enjoy doing things outside. Yeah. Thanks for asking me to sign you up. Well done trying something new. So regularly reflecting back with some of that language just normalizes it, right? It normalizes values. I think as any parent, we have our own biases, blind spots. How I have two kids, and one's almost 15, and one's 18, one's in university. I had to check my own biases in terms of, for example, what courses my kids are picking, what decisions they're making. And that can be anxiety provoking sometimes, anxieties and worries and concerns. And, I really liked how Patricia said at the end of the video there, but reflection. Regular reflection could help us to identify some of those things and realize what's our agenda as parents, what's our blind spots.
Yeah.
And being honest with ourselves and be like, hold on, is this my value speaking? Or do I need to leave space for some values and some wants and needs that are my kids that may be different from my own, within safety reasons, of course. The other challenge is when, advocacy is when your kids become adults, you have less ability to influence. Of course, you want to still be a supporter. And so I think being that reflection piece is important. So we were like, okay, whose agenda am I working on here?
Yeah.
And trusting. The other thing about supporting advocacy is trusting as your children get older and adults, people have the right, as I said before, to make their own mistakes. I have a right to make a mistake in choices I make. Autistic folks have the right to make mistakes as well. And sometimes your anxiety, you have to take a step back and be like, I'm not sure, of leaving this to the last minute and then asking for an extension is the right thing to do. But that's where learning comes in. So identify some of those areas and address them. Determine areas where additional support is needed. So, sometimes I think, as Patricia said too, when she was younger, she didn't have the language around thoughts and feelings and emotions. Yeah. And so sometimes that's a really good place to start, giving some emotional literacy, they say, fancy word, for teaching, you're really upset today. Or, that person who talked about her daughter, you're being a fantastic ally, Yeah. However, so giving, recognizing where some of those foundational pieces may be, and building them in.
Okay. And the strategies, a lot of these, I think we've talked
about. Yeah. I think one of my, national opportunities, we've talked about most of them in conversation, which is great. The one that we didn't formally say, and I want to, is with, not for, in terms of anybody who needs support, kind of goes along with scaffolding. But we do not want to be doing for another person. We want to be supporting it with. So making sure that we're not doing more than needs to be done, making sure that we're not taking over, making sure we're not speaking for, all of those sorts of things. Ideally, we want somebody to be as independent as possible. But when, if they're not there yet, not overstepping your bounds.
Right.
Even with good intentions.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Sally. Well, that is all the time that we have. I want to thank you so much today. I mean, clearly there was a lot of questions that we didn't get to. The good news for you, our audience, is that we're going to get to them. Somebody's agreed to stick around. We're going to review a lot of your questions, and we will get those back out. So look for that. Before you leave, I would ask that you complete the survey. It's going to pop up when we end. The more information we have about these webinars, the better job we can do with them and the more focused we can be. Make sure you grab those resources. There is so many jam-packed into that resource list. And before we go, Stephanie, is there anything that you didn't get to that you really want to leave our audience with today?
No, I think my biggest piece is making sure that you're listening to what people are saying, even if it's not verbally saying. And I always go back to values, what are we doing to make sure we're supporting people, enhancing their quality of life through any means, but in this case, advocacy. Excellent.
This webinar, like all, will be available on demand tomorrow on the Autism Ontario website. If you know somebody who you think might benefit from this, please share. The more people we get through the program, the more webinars we are able to put on. Thank you for your time today. I look forward to seeing you at our next Autism Ontario event.